There's something about the rise of the TMNT movie that is beautiful and yet shockingly grim. Aside from the obvious, of course, what with its superb animation and the unsettling body horror that pushes the envelope of its rating, there's also pressure on this movie to let the series go out in a blaze of glory after its premature end. There is a lot to cover and a lot it wants to say, and theoretically it should be stretched too thin to effectively do so. And perhaps it is. But even so, there's still a sort of bittersweetness in this movie that keeps you enraptured the entire time, and keeps you coming back for another watch in hopes of finding something new. And you will. The team made sure of that. And while this is definitely Leo's story first and foremost, this movie also has another unsung hero who goes through a substantial amount of growth in his hour-and-a-half runtime. Casey Jones Jr. is definitely a character I didn't expect to like as much as I do. Also, I'd like to mention before we get into anything that the Casey in this movie is one of two Caseys in Rise. The first was Foot Recruit, who was later revealed to be Casey Jones in the series finale.
Thank you, Cassandra.
My friends call me Casey.
But due to cancellation, she didn't get to live out her role as Casey. Probably in an attempt to include another familiar face in the story and a chance to have a Casey Jones that doesn't get cut off. Casey Jr. is more consistently known as Rise's Casey, so I'll be referring to Casey Jr. as Casey in this video because that's how they refer to him in the movie. Please don't yell at me. Now, as I said, this movie has a lot of different themes and developments going on. Throw a stick in any direction and you'll hit one of the messages this movie is trying to get across. There's Raph and his overcoming the crushing weight of leadership. There's Mikey, who partially embodies the power of hope and trust in the people around him. Leo breaks out of a self-destructive cycle of perfectionism and inferiority, while the Krang act as a great foil to Leo on humility and power. And Casey, I think Casey's story is about a lot of things. As the deuteragonist of the film, much of the important story beats go to Casey as much as they do Leo because their stories are intrinsically tied to one another in a game of narrative ping-pong. So forgive me if this video ends up being a Casey video with a side of Leo. Don't worry, I'll get to you for real later. For Leo, this movie is about waking up to reality, facing his fears and dealing with consequences. He has to learn how to break out of his debilitating perfectionism, or lose everything he loves. For Casey, it's a coming-of-age story. It's about grief and letting go, and about standing on your own, about picking up a legacy as heavy as the world because it's the right thing to do. Because it's the only thing to do. When I say Casey has a running theme of legacy, I mean it more than just metaphorically. His armor is basically a humanized turtle sans a shell. His mother's mask is painted with Leo's striking red stripes. His knee pads with little faces on them are very reminiscent of Mikey. Donnie's tech keeps him armed and protected, and his mask even scans the way that Donnie's goggles do. He quite literally wears the influences of the people in his life who aren't there anymore. He's introduced as the loyal student of Master Leonardo, whom Casey refers to as his sensei, which we can all kind of infer what that word is traditionally a stand-in for in the TMNT universe. In this opening scene, we're given a New York about 20-some-odd years into the future that's been decimated beyond recognition. The injured Leo is dragged along by Casey as they flee a pack of Krang dogs. Surrounded on all sides by Krang, time running thin for them all, and realizing that there is no escape, Leo admits defeat and gives Casey a mission to go back in time to stop these events from happening in the first place. Casey resists out of fear of losing Leo. It actually sounds at first like he's going to outright refuse, but Leo doesn't let him. Then, perhaps in an attempt to impart one final lesson to Casey, Leo tells him,
Casey, it's not about me.
This is a recurring phrase in this movie. Specifically, it's a lesson for younger Leo to learn and grow as a character, but it's also a lesson Casey must learn that I'll touch on later. Leo throws him through the portal that Mikey creates before being killed while protecting Casey. By this point, we've technically killed two of our main characters on screen and established Casey's role in the story. Stop the apocalypse. Which, in his defense, is quite a daunting task for a teenage boy, and Leo's instructions of find the key, stop the Krang are rather vague, but points for brevity, I guess. That said, it's no surprise that once he makes it to the past, Casey is struggling without his teacher there to give him direction and desperately wishes he were there to do so. He sees New York pre-decimation and realizes just how many people he's responsible for now that Leo has passed the responsibility on to him. But how does one even begin to stop the end of the world? Why him? He finds comfort in knowing that technically his teacher is here in the past and decides that his plan of action should be to find him and see what he should do next. Of course, the plot needs him to find the HAMATOs, so that certainly plays a part in his decision here. But he doesn't resolve to find them because he thinks they'll know where the key is. He wants to find Leo because he thinks, surely Leo will know what to do. He'll state later that the world needs Master Leonardo, and we'll talk a little bit more about that scene in a minute, but with this in mind, throughout the movie he sees saving the world as something his master could do, not him. Casey feels incapable of standing on his own. Perhaps he's not had to up to this point, since we see that Casey easily defers to others for direction. I think it's safe to assume that Casey is around Leo's age by the time he goes back, and I don't think it's a stretch to assume that this is probably his first major solo mission, and it was obviously not exactly planned. He's clearly very comfortable being a follower. This isn't necessarily a character flaw in and of itself, but the downside to this is that once he reunites with the family, he almost blindly follows Leo even as he's making rash decisions that endanger the team based solely on the fact that it's Leo he's following. It isn't until they almost die that he confronts Leo about his apparent lack of leadership skills. In the scene after the Krang train chase, we see that Casey has already absorbed a lot of his master's teachings. He understands the importance of teamwork and humility, perhaps because the pressing environment he grew up in didn't give him a choice, but it's here that we also see that Casey understands these teachings but hasn't considered that perhaps Leo doesn't. He's angry because Leo doesn't. For much of the movie, Casey has been lost in trying to follow someone who is already dead, and has been projecting that person onto someone else who can't possibly live up to his expectations as a way to cope with his loss. He speaks to Leo as though Leo isn't 20-something years younger, and notably not in an apocalypse yet. Logically, he seems to understand that Leo isn't his master yet, but he also seems to ignore it in favor of relishing in the comfort that Leo is here, even if it's not so much Leo himself as much as it is what Leo represents. Leo is, of course, delighted to find someone who finally thinks he's doing something right. But for all intents and purposes, despite the fact that they're the same person on a technicality, Master Leonardo and Leo are not the same people. And though he has good reason to be tearing Leo a new one in this scene, and it's definitely what Leo needs, it's unrealistic of him to have expected a 16-year-old boy to have the same skills and knowledge as an apocalyptic war veteran. And yet he does, because he isn't ready to let go of the Leo he remembers. I think that's why this moment when Casey throws the photo down for Leo to pick up and make his decision is so important. I'm of the belief that he's partially doing it because he knows it's the push Leo needs, mostly because of this smug little look he has when Leo agrees to step up as the leader, combined with the fact that I have a hard time believing Casey had Master Manipulator Leo as an implied father figure and didn't learn a little something about getting his way. But I also think it's out of frustration. For Leo, the photo is a reminder of what's on the line, who he fights for. But for Casey, it's a reminder of the people he's left behind and the people who are depending on him to change their fates. He needs Leo to see what he sacrificed to be here, what his teachers sacrificed to give Leo this opportunity, and to see what they have both already lost. In the same way that this is the moment Leo has to either shift his mentality or lose his family, Casey is forced to face the fact that his family, at least as he knew them, is already gone. This isn't the Leo he knew because this Leo hasn't gone through what Master Leonardo did yet, and it's Casey's mission to make sure he never has to. By the time the film hits its darkest hour and Leo is facing off against Krang 1 alone, Leo has fully embraced his role as the leader and prepares to make the ultimate sacrifice to save the team and the world. Once again, Leo springs this grand plan of self-sacrifice onto Casey, but this time, it's Leo who goes, and Casey who stays. And just as before, Casey resists and begs Leo to find another solution. There has to be another way. But there isn't another way. And it's here, with the safety of the world on the line, that Casey must finally come to terms with his own grief and understand Leo's final lesson. It's not about you. This is the climax of Casey's character. By no means does this message only refer to Leo's self-centered mentality. It's also a lesson Casey has to learn by accepting that as much as he loves his teacher and his family, and as terrifying as it is to be without Leo, it's his responsibility to put his feelings aside and prioritize the safety and well-being of others, because if he doesn't, then who will? He can't keep running away from his grief, and he can't prioritize the life of one individual over everyone else. He has to be a hero, and with that, he has to accept the burdens that it entails. That's also why I think this scene is so beautifully crafted. It's almost completely wordless, but tells so much through Casey's expressions. Casey's hand is on the key, but he hesitates. He's conflicted, torn between saving the world from complete destruction, or saving his teacher from certain death. For a moment, he seems determined. He knows this is what has to be done, and he wants to be strong for it before giving in to his own fear. When Leo begs him to pull the key, Casey, in a fit of despair and tears, does so before he can hesitate again. I think the fact that he pulls the key, not here, where he tries to shove down his pain, but rather here, where he is nearly overcome with it, is very true to the overall theme that Rise has, that emotions do not make you weak. They make you human. It's okay to be scared, because fear is not the antithesis of bravery. Compare this to the opening scene of the movie where Leo has to physically throw him through the portal himself to save him. He doesn't give Casey the chance to hesitate or resist. It is fully out of his control. But now, Casey is fully in control of his actions. He knows what he has to do. He just has to do it. But as pressing as the circumstances are, he can choose not to listen to Leo's orders. He has agency here. Or he must recognize that it's not about him, and it's not about Leo, and the only thing standing in his way now is his fear of facing his grief. He must choose. So, he chooses. In doing this, Casey saves the world. He's fulfilled his mission. He's created a future that his master Leonardo will never see. A future where his master will never exist. Which is great. It's what they wanted, right? A world that doesn't need an apocalyptic level warrior to lead a war against genocidal aliens. And yet, the next time we see Casey is here. He finds Leo's abandoned sword, he kneels on the ground, and for the first time, Casey grieves. Then, just a moment later, we see Splinter collapsed in despair. I think it's here that we remember that this martyrdom, this sense of duty and self-sacrifice in the name of heroism, is a core belief of the HAMATO clan. And I think this is what gives Casey such a powerful theme of legacy. Throughout the series prior to the movie, the development surrounding Splinter and how he and his family go about saving the world has a lot to do with duty and sacrifice. The idea of the whole over the individual to the point that every individual HAMATO is expendable. While there is a lot of breaking away of this mindset throughout the series and the plot does emphasize the power of the individual and the value of life, the theme of the whole over the individual is still a prevalent belief in the family as plainly shown in this film, and especially shown in the three heads of the family, if you could generously call them that, Karai, Splinter, and Leo. What began as a belief held by Karai, rooted in a sense of unshakable duty and love, morphed into something else by the time it got to Splinter, who inadvertently passed it on to his sons out of fear. And through that, Leo and his brothers have effectively brought it back to the roots Karai built it on. Sacrifice is not out of the disregard for life, but out of love for one another and out of responsibility as the only ones who can. Leo passes this mentality on to Casey by repackaging it as, it's not about me. The HAMATO legacy is being a family driven by duty, being protectors of the world, and being heroes. And in being so, their burden is a near crippling grief. But, at the same time, it's one of hope too. Being a child born at the end of the world, Casey is the classic tale of hope against all odds, where Leo embodies the hope of his family, and in the grander scheme, the whole of humanity. Casey embodies Leo's hope for a better future. And that is what we see in the movie's final scene. After Leo is saved by his family and the group recovers from the invasion, we finally see Casey grabbing a slice. This is the future Master Leonardo desperately wanted Casey to have, where he is not weighed down by grief, loneliness, or fear, but is stronger because he faced it and learned to let it go. And by allowing himself to feel those things, he's allowed himself to begin healing from them. The legacy Leo passed on to him was a heavy one, but it was, above all else, one built on love and hope. And through that, Casey gave them all a second chance, an opportunity to hope again. The weight of the world was never meant to be borne alone. And now, because of Casey, maybe it doesn't have to be.